Skinwalker Ranch, the Gorman family's descent into terror. A ranching family fires at an invulnerable wolf-like creature and watches reality itself collapse around them in the Utah desert. In the isolated expanse of northeastern Utah, where the Uinta Basin stretches beneath endless sky, a property known locally as Skinwalker Ranch becomes the setting for one of the most thoroughly documented cases of psychological deterioration linked to sustained paranormal phenomena. The year is 1994, and the Gorman family, identified publicly now as the Shermans, though initially granted privacy through pseudonym, arrives at their new property with the practical optimism of experienced ranchers. Terry and Gwen Sherman, along with their children, see opportunity in the 480-acre spread. What they cannot yet know is that within 2 years, they will abandon everything they have invested, driven not by financial failure or family discord, but by the relentless accumulation of events that defy every physical law they have built their lives upon. The psychological trajectory of the Gorman family stands as perhaps the most important human documentation in the entire Skinwalker Ranch investigation record. This is not a case of brief exposure to unusual phenomena. This is not a single traumatic incident followed by recovery. This is the systematic unraveling of a functional family unit over 24 months, documented through extensive interviews conducted by investigative journalist George Knapp, whose reporting brings credibility and methodical attention to experiences that might otherwise be dismissed without examination. The early encounters on the ranch present as disturbing but manageable anomalies. The family discovers a steer somehow sealed inside a closed trailer with no explanation for how the animal entered. Lights appear in the night sky over the property, performing maneuvers that contradict conventional aircraft capabilities. These events unsettle the family, certainly, but they retain their equilibrium. They are ranchers, practical people accustomed to solving problems through direct action and common sense. The strange occurrences are filed away as mysteries, unsettling but not yet destabilizing. The cattle mutilations represent the first significant escalation. The Gormans begin losing livestock to predation that leaves behind evidence contradicting natural animal attacks. The financial impact is immediate and severe. Ranching operates on narrow margins, and the loss of valuable cattle threatens the family's economic viability. But beyond the financial strain, the mutilations introduce a new psychological element. The sense that something is deliberately targeting their livelihood. The losses are not random. The pattern suggests intelligence, intentionality, purpose. Then comes the encounter that Terry Sherman will later describe as the turning point, the moment when his understanding of reality fundamentally fractures. The event is witnessed by multiple family members, providing corroboration that removes any possibility of individual hallucination or misperception. On their property, in daylight, the family observes a large wolf-like creature. The animal is enormous, far larger than any natural wolf documented in North America. Its behavior is bold, unafraid, almost curious as it approaches the family. Terry Sherman is an experienced rancher and hunter. He understands predator behavior. He recognizes threat. He responds with the most practical solution available to a rancher facing a dangerous animal on his property. He retrieves his rifle. What happens next is documented in multiple interviews Sherman provides to George Knapp, and the consistency of his account across tellings adds significant credibility to an inherently incredible claim. Sherman fires at the creature. Not once, but multiple times. These are not warning shots fired into the air. These are direct hits at close range, fired by a man who has handled firearms his entire adult life. Sherman watches the bullets strike the animal. He sees the impact, and he watches as the creature shows no reaction whatsoever. No flinching, no retreat, no visible injury. The wolf-like entity simply absorbs the gunfire as though the bullets are passing through empty air, despite the visible evidence of impact. Then impossibly, the creature vanishes, not by running away into the brush, not by moving beyond sight. It simply ceases to be present, disappearing as though it never existed, leaving Terry Sherman standing with a smoking rifle and the absolute certainty that every fundamental assumption he holds about how the world operates is demonstrably false. The psychological impact of this encounter cannot be overstated. For a man whose entire identity is built on self-sufficiency, on the ability to protect his family and property through practical action, the experience represents total helplessness. The rifle, the most basic tool of rancher self-defense, proves utterly ineffective. If bullets cannot stop the threat, what can? The question has no answer, and the absence of answer becomes a corrosive presence in the family's daily existence. Following this watershed moment, the Gorman's psychological state enters documented decline. The sense of being watched becomes constant. The family develops the conviction that whatever inhabits the ranch is not simply present, but actively aware of them, tracking their movements, perhaps even responding to their actions. This is not paranoia in the clinical sense, because the family's concerns are grounded in their direct observations of phenomena that suggest intelligence and intentionality. Sleep becomes difficult. The constant vigilance required to monitor the property for new anomalies creates exhaustion. The children show signs of distress. Gwen Sherman, in interviews with Knapp, describes the emotional burden of trying to maintain normalcy for her family while living in an environment where normalcy has become impossible. How does a mother explain to her children that the world they thought they understood no longer operates by comprehensible rules? The financial losses continue to accumulate. More cattle are affected. The ranch, purchased as an investment and livelihood, becomes instead a source of mounting debt and anxiety. But the Gormans discover that leaving is not simple. Who purchases a property with a reputation for impossible events? How does one disclose the experiences without destroying any possibility of sale? George Knapp's documentation of the family during this period captures people in genuine crisis. His interviews are not sensationalized. They present a family struggling to articulate experiences that have no adequate vocabulary. The Shermans are not seeking attention or fame. They are people trying to be heard and believed about something that happened to them, something real in its impact, regardless of its impossibility in conventional terms. The decision to sell and leave the property is described by the family not as a choice, but as a necessity for survival. The psychological toll has become unsustainable. Whatever is happening on the ranch, the Gormans recognize that continued exposure will destroy them. Terry Sherman, in particular, describes the profound sense of defeat in abandoning property he invested in, but also the clarity that no amount of financial loss is worth the continued erosion of his family's well-being. The sale of the ranch is eventually accomplished, and the Gorman family removes themselves permanently from the property. Whether their departure resolves the psychological trauma they sustained is not documented in detail within the available record. What is clear is that the family never returns. The physical removal from the environment becomes their only available intervention, the only action that stops the accumulation of impossible events. The legacy of the Gorman family's experience extends far beyond their personal ordeal. When researcher Combe Kelleher and journalist George Knapp collaborate on documenting the Skinwalker Ranch phenomena, the family's testimony provides the essential human dimension to what might otherwise remain an abstract scientific curiosity. The instrumentation matters. The multiple witness corroboration matters. The physical evidence matters. But the Gormans' documented psychological deterioration transforms the investigation from academic exercise into urgent human concern. Their willingness to be interviewed, despite anticipating ridicule and disbelief, reflects their conviction that their experiences deserve documentation and serious consideration. They are not publicity seekers. They are people who endured something that permanently altered their understanding of reality, and they believe that what happened to them could happen to others. Their testimony is an act of warning as much as documentation. The psychological danger documented in the Gorman family case establishes the model for understanding the human cost of sustained exposure to high-strangeness phenomena. Whatever the ultimate explanation for the events at Skinwalker Ranch, whether exotic natural phenomena, psychological effects of unknown environmental factors, or something that challenges current scientific paradigms entirely, the family's documented distress was unquestionably real. Their financial losses were real. The disruption to their lives was permanent. The case raises profound questions about the ethics of paranormal investigation. When does documentation of anomalous phenomena justify exposing human beings to potential psychological harm? What responsibility do investigators have to protect witnesses who come forward with experiences that invite ridicule? The Gormans cooperated with documentation efforts, but at what personal cost? The Skinwalker Ranch story continues beyond the Gorman family's departure, with subsequent ownership and investigation bringing additional resources and scientific credentials to the effort. But the family's experience remains the human core of the entire investigation. They were not researchers choosing to expose themselves to potential phenomena for the sake of knowledge. They were ordinary people who purchased property and encountered something that systematically dismantled their psychological stability through the sheer impossibility of their daily experiences. Terry Sherman's account of firing repeatedly at an invulnerable wolf-like creature that vanished into nothingness stands as one of the most visceral testimonies in paranormal research literature. It is specific, consistent across tellings, corroborated by family members, and presented by a witness whose credibility is enhanced rather than diminished by his obvious reluctance to claim such an impossible experience. He is a man reporting what he saw, not what he wanted to see or expected to see, but what actually occurred before his eyes and the eyes of his family. The Gorman family's ordeal at Skinwalker Ranch documents what happens when the impossible becomes routine, when the protective assumptions that allow human beings to function in the world are systematically violated day after day until psychological collapse becomes inevitable. Their story matters not because it provides answers, but because it validates the human cost of questions that remain unresolved. They lived through something that should not be possible, and they carry the weight of that experience permanently. Their documented testimony stands as both evidence and warning, a reminder that some investigations involve not just the search for truth, but the very real potential for harm to those who encounter it firsthand. If you found this case compelling, subscribe to Vanishing Roads for more documented paranormal investigations from around the world. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented case files. All events reference real investigations and reported incidents.